So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm also really excited to be here as well, to learn from everyone and share some of my research work that I'm doing. Actually, not done yet, still in the process. So I am a non-Indigenous educator or student, if you want to call me that. But I think that my people as well and myself have been affected by colonization. I'm originally from Nigeria. My husband is from Botswana in Southern Africa. So we shared. My kids are very culturally inclined, if I should say that. We actually recently went to Nigeria and Botswana with our kids. It was a really, really fun experience. My kids speak my language, they speak their dad's language, they learn French, and they speak English. So I think that culture and language is something that is really of interest to me, and education as well. And so I always, embrace people's culture, try and understand people's culture, and also respect culture as well. So I have been a sessional at First Nations University just over 6 years, and I've been really blessed to have wonderful people there and their support as well, with elders and faculty members and students, is where I get to, meet students, meet different diverse students, from the reserve, Regina, and just share their experiences and their struggles and just and their stories of trauma and poverty and social inequalities and things that they really cannot control, and just how it could affect education as well. And so I guess that's what brought my interest into this study that I'm doing now. So because I teach Indigenous health and I teach nursing students as well, and so every semester it's brand new students from high school or and when we teach culture competency and cultural competence care, it's almost so strange to them because they cannot. Most of them can't really identify with a culture. Well, I don't have a culture, So are you a Canadian? So what does it mean to be a Canadian then? Most of them can't really define that, and I feel like they struggle with that aspect as well. So I think my research then is focused on indigenizing and colonizing nursing education here at the U of R, and I'll touch on some of my methods as well as to how I'm going to go about that. So just to go ahead then. So what I did then, I tried to look at the origin pretty much, like the beginning, when contact happened, and also some of the colonization as well and assimilation policies that were put in place, especially in Canada here. And I also forgot to mention too, I'm an ally. I'm not an Indigenous person, but again, I'm very fortunate to have worked with a lot of First Nations people as well. So just like residential schools in Canada, I mean, we all know that there are boarding schools as well in the U.S. and in Australia, in Africa as well. So these are all assimilation policies, right? To assimilate Indigenous people, to learn the Western and white ways as well. So here in Canada, what I think the aim of residential school system in Canada was, again, to change the learning education or learning system of Indigenous people, right? Bring them in the classroom, they sit in a certain way, they take permission, and if they fail something, they get punished. Kind of different from what they would, Indigenous pedagogy, right? Ways of knowing and ways of learning. And also because children are easily to be assimilated or to be taught, Western ways or different ways. So it was easier for them to bring these children and teach them Christian ways as well, because they were thought that, the Indigenous culture was, devilish, it was barbaric, they'll go to hell. And then there's a lot of research as well on that, of Indigenous, residential school survivors, sharing their stories of, and the trauma as well as a result of residential schools. And so their culture then needed to be, to take on white ways or white values and white, norms. And also their appearance too, you look really brown, your skin is very dark, right? You need to be white as well. So they changed their dress, and that, that kind of reminded me with the Orange Shirt Day, right? Where that lady was taking, again, a very cherished item that she brought from school, from home, but it was taken away, right? Because it wasn't, Western enough, or it wasn't white enough. And so part of the goal then is to, again, they needed to look more white, right? They needed to change their parents and their language, as well as their whole ideology, their whole culture and identity, especially, needed to be assimilated and look more, I guess, more take on Western ways. So the aim of this research then is to pretty much identify the role of ethics in terms of mitigating barriers, right? Barriers that can prevent culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally relevant teaching methods, especially in nursing, and nursing education as well. And the reason why I focus on nursing is because health, right? Health is very important, right? I mean, we all go to hospitals, and I want my doctor to be able to understand my culture, right? Understand and respect my culture. I want my caregivers as well, not just doctors, not just nurses, to really treat me the way that they would want to be treated. And I think we find that a lot of research then, especially with Indigenous women and encounters with mainstream hospitals or care, right? They've had really, traumatic experience, of abuse and just overlooked, and not really taken care of because they probably don't understand who they are. They overtly assume that people are drunk or people are, abusing things, and without really knowing who these people are. And so my focus then is, and then again, Canada is very diverse. I mean, I see in my nursing classes over 150, sometimes around 40 students. There's diversity there, there's not just, white students. So it's very important then for these students to actually graduate, right? And actually get to feel like they are actually part of the system, part of the nursing program. And also to pretty much address the question then about whether if Canada's Canadian institution, just like the U of R, for example, right, can actually act as ally to Indigenous people, right, in the struggle to indigenize education. So what that means then is, the system of education here is quite different from Indigenous systems of education. And so my question is, and even for myself, I'm trying to have a decolonized mindset. But I live in Canada. I go to the U of R, which is really centered towards Western education. So my question is how can this Western system then act as allies? I know there's been a lot of progress here at the U of R with indigenization, office, with the name change, buildings as well. Well, those are surface features, right? We need to do more. We need to touch on cultural learning and cultural training in terms of our educators, administrators, students as well, and community members, right? So I guess that's kind of my aim here of this research. So back to Indigenous ways of knowing then, and I think that when we touch on Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous knowledge, a lot of people are confused or kind of there's some sort of resistance because people say, well, I'm not Indigenous, right? Am I supposed to learn a different language or meet elders? But I think that we need to appreciate different and diverse ways of knowing. Right now, in my ethics committee, I'm trying to get an elder to be on my ethics board, but the rule is that you have to be qualified, you have to have some certain education and experience and degrees and all that. Well, most of my elders don't have that. They have more than that. They have knowledge in Indigenous knowledge, right, and experience, right? So how can you argue that, right? Well, because it's not scientific. They can't really measure what kind of knowledge they have. So there's a big resistance in that as well. So for Indigenous education and decolonized education, it's beyond the mastery of cramming things and knowing academic content. It's more than that. It's applying critical thinking. It's about considering people. It's about learning people's identity and cultures and how it can actually shape their understanding in the classroom. So we all see the same screen, but we probably all have different interpretations, right, of what's going on, either based on what research we've done or what we've read, or just our cultural background or our experiences as well. And this is what happens in our classroom as well with students, especially nursing students. They interpret things differently, again, based on their history, based on their identity, their culture, and experiences as well. Also, again, Indigenized education is very holistic, right? It means it encompasses your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, occupational, social, and cultural aspects as well. So it takes that into consideration. It actually encourages you to get to know the students and their needs as well, and sort of carry them along. You get to know your environment, get to know the people as well that you're working with. It fosters cooperation as well, not competition, and this is very important as well, because I mean, in the Western education, it's about competition. You know, when you do group work, how am I going to get better marks than the next person, right? You know, I get emails sometimes from students, you know, complaining about a group member rather than actually talking to the group member themselves. It's almost like a competition, right? People don't really know how to work together. People don't know how to, you know, cooperate and work as a team. And I think with Indigenous ways of knowing, then it tries to address that problem. It can be unstructured, right? Meaning that, you know, it could occur within concrete contexts. So it could occur anywhere outside of the classroom, you know, not just inside the classroom as well. So we could do field trips, right? We could, you know, tell students to actually go to cultural events, you know, outside of their comfort zone.
Learn things,
you know,
right?
and try to learn all the new ways of knowing, try to learn people's knowledge, culture as well. So why ethics, and what does ethics has to do with this? Well, I'm going to briefly define ethics. I think the reason why I have ethics there is, I think as human beings, there is a part of us that want to do right. There is a part of us that, you know, consider people, other people. And so, you know, when programs are being designed, or as educators as well, we try to do things that, you know, would benefit our students, probably more than the rest. However, those decisions, we considering, you know, people's culture, people's feelings, people's you know, laws, and is it ethically correct? Then is it ethically, you know, okay or good, right, to do those things? And I think when we like Paulo Freire's article, I don't know if I pronounce his name properly, Education is Politics, right? You know, it is political. Education itself is political. It is political whether, as educators, we acknowledge it or the students actually are aware of it. It's, you know, in terms of, it is political, you know, in terms of what we put in our content and our curriculum and what we'd actually leave out. So I think with that, then we need to again understand that with ethics, again, it puts things into consideration in terms of, you know, acknowledging other areas, acknowledging Indigenous people, acknowledging that you know, Indigenous people are the true you know, owners of this land, and so we need to respect their culture. We need to get to know where we are, the land that we live in, and how it benefits everybody. You know, and again, regardless of you know, their culture, or their age, their gender orientation, sexual orientation, and all that. So. Ethics in Indigenized education, it actually points out the elements of decolonization, because it actually helps us to understand that you know, people are diverse, right? People have different cultures, and so in terms of decolonizing the mindset, we have to, as educators, our mindset has to be decolonized. We can't just look one way. There are diverse ways, there are diverse students as well. Culturally relevant pedagogies are very important as well. It's important then for us to get to know our students, get to actually understand their stories of their struggles, their stories of trauma, stories of poverty. You know, some students have it easy and some don't, right? Some students, you know, are affected by residential schools, right, with their parents and have to either work extra, and so they might not, you know, for example, hand in assignment, you know, on time. So we need to again consider those factors. We need to again consider their struggle and see ways, and find ways to mitigate those problems and those barriers as well. Also, deliberate involvement of institution, again, it helps us to understand that as an institution, we do have a big role to play in terms of again helping students, and also you know, in achieving more than academic achievement or performance as well. As students and faculty members, as well as community members, we all have to be involved. It's not just an educator's you know, responsibility; it's a collective responsibility as well. Indigenized methodologies and teaching methods as well needs to be appreciated as well. I know for my class in my department, we have elders as well that come in and you know, we smudge, and you know, they come and teach us. They share stories of, you know, the struggles of colonization and when they went to residential schools. And I think we really need to understand culture in order for us to actually show empathy for Indigenous people or people that minoritized students or marginalized students as well. We need to actually understand their history, understand their struggle, understand their culture, in order for us to actually show empathy and show support for them as well. Promote respect, again, and autonomy, justice, and truth as well is very important, right? Very important for people to feel respected, for people to feel safe, that the culture is safe and respected as well, and welcomed as well. So we need to, and I think that's what ethics actually, gives us that perspective, that step back to actually think about what we're doing and how it can benefit people as well. So the concept then of how a new colonial institution, like for example the U of R, can be an ally to Indigenous people, I guess ethics can address that, like I just explained. Also it brings to light then the relevance of decolonization and deliberate involvement of institutions in moral and ethical decision making in embedded Indigenous methodologies and teaching methods, as well as the content of educating people. So the long-term effects, for example, of residential schools, right? So maybe that's why people have barriers to learning, and also Indigenous pedagogy as well. So ethics then will address that issue as well and help us to understand that the residential schools and all of these assimilation policies do have a long-term effect, right? It's been passed on from generation to generation. And so that there's a resistance then to reproduce social education. So just because students actually come from a poor background or poor or deprived, I guess, environment does not mean that they have to fail when they come to and have again poor maybe scores, as for example, does not mean that when they come to university it would carry on, it will reproduce their failure, right? So I think that a cultural responsive or relevance pedagogy then and ethics, I think, would help us address that so that it does not reproduce itself, because we're considering people, we're considering their struggles and their barriers, their identity, getting to know them, and also providing ways and methods of learning for them as well. So this is just an example. I know most of you have probably seen this the picture. Sorry. So in the first one, it kind of defines equality, right? You're giving everyone the same opportunity. But is that really what they need, right? Some people might be worse off than the rest, like we've seen in the picture. Even if they've been given the same course or the same material, he still can't see. There's still that barrier, right? It could be the social inequalities, it could be cultural, historical problems or intergenerational trauma that they've faced. But equality, equity then is giving people what they actually need, right? And so we know though that even if we've given them the same block, he can even see more right now than the rest. But once we give the shortest version, right, 2 blocks, at least he can see better. But there's more to this, right? So equity again versus equality, right? So the first image, like I said, it is again assume that everybody needs the same program. Let's look at this this way in terms of education. We're saying that everyone needs the same program, everyone needs the same support, so that they can actually reach their goal. For example, right, accomplish academic performance and all that. But the second picture, though, your image as well, individuals are given the different support. So what they actually need to make it possible for them to have equal access, right, to the game or to education. But the third barrier, the third picture, education theorists say, well, why not take that barrier out, right? Take away those barriers that people actually face, right? And then they can actually see, right? So in the third image, then all 3 can actually see the game, right, without any support or recommendations, because the cause of the inequality then was removed or addressed, right? So the systemic barrier again has been removed, and so they can all see. And again, this example can be applied to a lot of areas in education, in our lives as well. And I think that, but the reality of it is that, hey, some people are way more, getting more than they should, right, than the rest. And I think, again, we could explain what equity and equality is, but the reality is that we're seeing, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of, high school dropouts, higher rates of, health disparities as well, in indigenous people and minorities as well than, the general population. That is what reality is. And I think with ethics and cultural competency, we can try and address those barriers, try and address those social inequalities as well, that can, again, prevent our students from, again, reaching their goal or seeing the game, right? So decolonized education then can provide an avenue for each generation, right, to actually inspire, especially minorities and marginalized society. Because you've broken that barrier. Now students can actually achieve academic achievement. They can actually achieve a goal or break that line, that curse, if you want to call it, right? They can actually finish school. They can actually, become, citizens and achieve their goal, right? So we're not reproducing social education, right? We're not reproducing, the barriers that have happened to them or have prevented them from achieving goals or from seeing the game, right? We've broken that barrier down. So again, they grow up, the kids see them, and they can actually follow suit, right? Or become role models, right? So it also contributes towards indigenous communities, social, cultural, and political interests as well. It again empowers indigenous people, right, to exercise their inherent sovereign rights. And I see a lot of students too in my class, indigenous students, who are struggling to pay tuition, and people don't understand it. Well, I had one student actually, she was so frustrated because we were having a conversation about indigenous rights and treaties as well, and people were having comments, and this indigenous lady, and she goes, you know what, I'm actually struggling. I have to pay my tuition because I'm not covered by my band, and she gave all these examples, so I have to pay my tuition myself. But we have treaties, right? It doesn't cover non-status indigenous people, right? Unless you're status. And so I think, and if your band is poor, they don't have enough money, then you're on your own. So not every indigenous person have free education, access to education. Not all indigenous people have access to healthcare services, right? These are all assumptions or stereotypes, right? That we have towards indigenous people. So critical intercultural communication, then again, it gives us that gap or that avenue to actually have these conversations in class, have these conversations outside class of culture and identity, and how we can actually shape our students, or how we can actually shape our learning. This was actually taken from, and I forgot to cite the textbook actually that was actually just recently published, Cultural Relevant Pedagogy by Fran, Shanine Peets, and can you remember? And one other lady from, the textbook from Faculty of Education here actually, and it's on page 240. Okay. It's titled
or 15, isn't it?
15.
Yeah. Yes. It's
there you go. Sorry. Oops. Good thing I cited it. Otherwise, you would have caught me. That's my work. Just kidding.
Yeah.
So sorry, guys.
Good to be safe.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Very interesting book. You need to get a copy. It's an amazing book. They have a lot of sources there as well, like Gloria Latsin Billings, right? Geneva Gay, right? So this is actually a very interesting table, I guess, that I picked from them. So they broke it down, right? So structures and systems that actually work against CRP, and also subjectivities as well that make CRP unintelligible, so unachievable, right? So assuming normalcy of whiteness. So we all of a sudden, think that English is the only way, the best way of learning, or the best language of learning. We now think that being white in our society is normal, right? And then if you're not, then you're minority, or you have to fit in. Beetle thinking, right? Again, hegemony of Western versus versions of what counts as education. Just an example I gave, right, with the elder, right? So again, because they didn't go to school, university, right? They don't have a master's, a PhD, or a title beside their name. All of a sudden, we are, contemplating, well, is this elder really qualified or not, right? and discourse as well. And with that textbook, actually, they explained, the authors actually explained with their experience working with pre-service teachers and in-service teachers that they found that teaching culture especially is not enough, wasn't done in the right way, wasn't really sufficient for them. Teachers are asking, well, why should I learn culture? Why should I learn about identity when sometimes my classroom is full of white kids like me? What do they need to know about other people's culture? Why is it relevant to them? Well, one thing we forget to understand then is that these kids are going to grow. They're going to work with people with from diverse cultures. They're going to be in classes. They're going to be nurses or doctors or students, right? And so it's going to be culture shock for them. And so we need to again understand that there are diverse ways of doing things, right? There are diverse people, and they need to be respected as well. And again, like I talked about with English language, all of a sudden English language is now the best language to use, right? Countries are spending money, billions of dollars, to send their kids or their students outside of their country to Western countries and education systems to actually learn English, and all of a sudden it's the best way to learn. But I guess the argument then is that languages are diverse. English is not even the most spoken language in the world, right? And so we need to understand that again, people's culture and language, and identity pretty much goes hand in hand, and it's really important for us to understand and respect different languages as well. White privilege is something that they also covered in that textbook, which is again, I can spend 3 hours explaining this, but again, it's relevant. I mean, with the picture that we saw, with the reality, right? We know that a lot of people have privileges than the rest, right? Because of their skin color, because of the way they look, the way they talk, and their influences as well in our society. I remember actually, I went to Grand Prairie Regional College when I first came to Canada. That was in 2004, and in my English class, the prof had actually picked a book on, it's about Cape Breton. And I had no idea, I've never heard of that word before, didn't know it was a town or city in Canada. But I felt like my peers actually had more advantage than I did, right? Because they probably know what that is. So I had to start from scratch. I had to actually know what that town is or where it is, and then start reading the book. So my peers were actually ahead of me. But what that prof refused to acknowledge is the diversity, is that not everybody actually lived in Canada, not everybody were born in Canada, not everybody actually, so it actually placed me at a really disadvantage. A lot of people had more privilege then because they could understand the writing skills, and they could understand the story behind that literature. And I was coming from a different background, a different culture. I've never seen women smoke before. I've never seen, two-spirited people. So these were all culture shock for me, right? So, and that literature actually covered all of these things that I never really heard of, right? So it was a shock for me. And I think that we need to again understand the diversity in our classroom, right? We need to again understand that people are different. Canada is very multicultural, and so for me, I had to, I could not connect with that story. I could not understand that story because it was almost non-existent for me. Like I said, when I came to Canada, it was my first time seeing women smoking outside, and I would see, in the hallway, I would see a boy and a girl kissing. I'm like, whoa,
wow.
because back home you don't do that. You don't kiss in public, right? You do that at home because you don't want little kids to see. But that was our culture. That was our ideology. Now it's fine, right? Now it's fine. So I think that it's normal, right? But is it really normal, right? For everybody, what you think is normal may not be normal for me, right? But I believe in this culture, and I believe in this country, and now it's okay. Like it's nothing to me. But again, when I first came, and I'm sure the example, where I'm from, it's got a toilet or a loo, right?
Yeah.
And so I was scared. I'm like, try and look like don't want to see anybody washing themselves, right? But again, these are all things, little things that are different that becomes normal, right, in the Western world, and we expect everybody to kind of follow one, right? And I think moving back to, I'm going to wrap up right here real quick, but there's 3 dimensions of cultural relevant pedagogy, and this is actually from Government of Ontario. There's a program that they did right now, recently actually, trying to, I guess, apply CRP into the elementary and K-12 education. So it takes on two dimensions. So institutional. So again, we're looking at our administrators, especially for elementary and K-12, where administrators and principals pretty much have a say in the curriculum and curriculum content and how the teacher should teach. And also in the university as well. I mean, you have your dean and you have the administrators and the president, right? They control pretty much so in terms of leadership of the school, then again we need to have them understand the implications and also the importance of CRP as well. Get them involved in terms of decision making, getting people as well in our communities as well, in terms of their partnership as well with our community, making sure that people are aware and also the cultures are actually respected and identified as well. It can take on personal dimension as well. So as ourselves, as educators or as students, in our mindsets of cultural responsive educators, and also the practices that we engage indoors, outdoors, in closed doors, even at home, and the things that we say and how we approach our students as well. Again, identifying cultures in class, different diverse there's not really nothing like color blindness, and I hear that a lot, is color blindness. No, I'm different, I don't look like you, right? And that's fine, that's okay. Right? I speak differently, I look differently, I dress differently. And so as persons, as educators, we need to again understand our role, the role that we have to play in applying cultural responsive practices and pedagogies in our classroom as well. Instructional, again, it has to do with learning our curriculum, right? And also how our learners feel, right? Do they feel comfortable? Do they actually feel that they're respected or their cultures matters, right? When they have assignments and are their opinion welcome, right? It doesn't have to be the same as the next student, but again, try and encourage critical thinking and try to also encourage a really culturally responsive classroom environment so that students can actually learn and not just learn, but actually ask questions. So why is this group then? Why does that guy have a taller advantage or privilege, right, than I do? Ask critical questions that that actually shapes their ways of learning and knowledge as well. So I kind of went back then to RCAP, right, which is again central question, and this again ties down to colonization. Right, so when RCAP was done, when the commission was over, I think there was some recommendations. Well, their central question was that the foundations of a fair and honorable relationship between First Nation, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, or what are the fair foundations, I should say, of honorable relationship between Indigenous and Aboriginal people? Because we know though that with the signing of treaty, after the signing of treaty, that relationship kind of went sour because what was signed was not what was promised, or was not what was being delivered, and so it was mistrust and it was betrayal, and so their question was then that how do we now build a fair and respectable relationship between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And their central conclusion was that the main policy direction pursued for more than 150 years. So we're talking about colonization, obviously, of residential schools, all of the assimilation policies, the Indian Act, and all of those assimilation policies have been wrong. Right? They've done wrong to Indigenous people, taking away their culture, forcing students to go to residential schools. They face trauma and abuse, and so these are all wrong. And that was their RCAP recommendation, conclusion, I should say. And more recently, the CRC again is very common now. It's taken on grounds, I should say, not necessarily common. But again, the calls to action is something that we need as an institution, we need to take seriously. We need to again look at ways of again providing funding. Indigenous students on the reserve again get less than $2,000 per student, less $2,000 per student than non-Indigenous students. So how can we address lack of funding for Indigenous students as well, and also a lot of them that are seeking post-secondary education. So we call upon the federal and provincial government and territorial government as well, and Aboriginal governments to again develop culturally appropriate early childhood education programs for Aboriginal families, improving education attainment levels and success rates again, we know that that's a problem. That seems to be a problem. It's not that Indigenous students are not going to school. It's that they're being forced out of school. A lot of them have faced racism, discrimination. A lot of them again have family issues or social barriers, right? That teachers don't care. They have 3 months to hand in final exam, do your exam. If you fail, you fail. They push them away. And so students are dropping out of school, and so we need to again find ways to address that issue as well. Develop again a culturally appropriate curricula is again addressed there. So I guess my method then with my research, what I've done is that so the U of R nursing program is a fairly new program. It's 5 or 6 years ago. So what I'm doing then is I'm collecting data in terms of the demographics. So what kind of students are they admitting, right? Are they admitting Indigenous students? How many Indigenous students are admitted in 2014, 2015? How many non-Indigenous students? And most important thing is how many are actually going out? How many are actually graduating? Right? I actually have a student recently she's Nigerian actually, but she dropped out of nursing program in her 3rd year. Because she failed one of her practicum, med surg it's called, and it's supposed to be one of the hardest practicum. And she was in tears. She was crying because she said, I've spent so many years, and my teacher, my practicum teacher didn't even want to listen to me. Immediately she was suggesting, well, are you sure nursing is for you? Why not do LPN? Why not do exercise, become an exercise therapist or something else? And she looked at her and said, no, I want to be a nurse. But she ended up failing because she tried 3 times. And she has learning disability, right? She has accommodation, but I wonder if they even consider that, right? It's part of my question. So we're seeing that students are actually dropping out. Yes, they admit that, but in nursing, the whole nursing program itself, a lot of my students are complaining. It is tedious, it is very hard, it is very time consuming. You can't even work, you can't even have a life pretty much. You're jumping from one place to the other, you're doing practicums, you're not getting paid, you have to pay your tuition. So a lot of times, the institution does not really care about you as a student. We don't care about your problems, right? Your social problems that you don't have control over, right? So how is it fair then to make a student fail, right? A student, for example, that is struggling to actually make a change, for herself and her family, has gotten admitted into nursing. And yet, she's a single mom. I have lots of single moms in my class, and I understand their struggle because I was pregnant. I have a lot of pregnant, almost every semester actually. There's either a pregnant woman or pregnant student or a student that just had a baby, which recently just happened. And so when they come and tell me, can I get an extension? I'm pregnant, and I understand that struggle because I was also pregnant when I did my master's all through, and I understood. And I get it. I get their struggle. It's hard. It's hard to go to school when you're pregnant, juggle your health, the baby, your school, your family, finances. It's a lot of work. And I think that that's something that we need to understand. We don't have to be them, but we need to again understand people's struggles. And sometimes they don't have that ability to actually solve their problem all of a sudden, right? So, but we need to show support. We need to show respect for each student. So I think, so I'm going to collect that data, and then I'm working with elders to again, apply some Indigenous culture and some Indigenous. With the nursing program, there's only one. They're only allowed to take. It's only mandatory, for them to take one Indigenous course, which is INHS 100. But that's it. They do that. That's it. On the other, Indigenous, learning that they get is probably through community work. But again, that is not monitored, and that we don't really know who they're going to meet, right? So we're trying to, again, see ways how we can, again, apply cultural responsive teaching, and also, especially with the educators as well, the nursing educators. What do they know about culture? What do they understand about Canada, about Indigenous people? about minorities as well. How many minorities do they have in their faculty, or faculty members that are minorities or marginalized, can identify as a minority is also a question, right? So we need to be inclusive learning, inclusive faculty members, inclusive curriculum is something that I'm pushing towards. So I'm still collecting data, and I hope that my presentation have been you've learned a thing or two, and I hope I'm going to leave the floor open here, and I thank you so much for listening. So thank you.